Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Shalini Amin. I lead program development and learning at XED. We're a global executive education firm that designs and delivers high impact learning journeys in collaboration with the world's top universities, including today's esteemed partner, the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. It's our pleasure to welcome you to this exclusive executive briefing on tariffs and trade wars, turning global volatility into competitive advantage, facilitated by Professor Doug Thomas from Darden. To formally introduce Darden and our faculty speaker today, please join me in welcoming Devin Bigness, Chief Client Officer and Executive Director at Darden. Devin, over to you.
Great. Good. Thank you so much, Shalini, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening. I guess that covers all of our bases here for where in the world people are zooming in from. So wonderful to be with you all and have the opportunity to introduce my colleague, Doug Thomas. What Darden Executive Education and Lifelong Learning does is work with organizations to understand strategic priorities, link that directly to critical capabilities, and then design transformational learning programs to do that. We're based within the Darden School of Business, as Shalini said, at the University of Virginia. We were recently proud to be ranked the #1 global public business school by Financial Times, and incredibly proud of all of those words, right? Global, public, business, and school. Very excited by all of those things. And we increasingly are operating on a global basis. I had the privilege of being with my XED colleagues and my Darden colleagues last September in Mumbai and Bangalore and Delhi. Very excited about this webinar as we continue the progression of sharing insights for business leaders to help them navigate the increasingly complex world. Some would sort of resurface the term VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we all live in. My colleague Doug is the academic lead of the SANS Institute for Lifelong Learning here at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. He's also the Henry E. McQuain Professor of Business Administration. And really what he focuses on is understanding supply chains, operations, the global leadership, global strategy, and working with organizations and individuals to help them navigate these rapids of the increasingly complex world. Really excited to have Doug here. Doug will also be potentially one of the faculty that it comes to India in September of this upcoming year. So more to come on that. But excited that Doug and maybe another colleague will join on a sort of an India trip. So he'll be in market in India later this year. But really excited to turn it over to Doug to share some insights on how to navigate this increasingly complex world and how you might turn some opportunities, some threats, or some challenges perhaps into opportunities for value creation. So Doug, over to you.
Great, thanks, Devin. Everyone hear me okay? Coming through okay, good. Yeah, thanks so much for showing up in the morning, afternoon, or evening, or wherever you are, and listening to me for hopefully around 20 minutes to allow some time for questions and answers. It's a tough ask for a professor to talk for that short a time, especially about something like global supply chains and tariffs, which I spend almost all of my energy these days studying. And we're going to look at a bit of a glimpse of current landscape of tariffs. We'll actually look a little historically to see what trade policy has done historically to get an idea of where the opportunities might lie. As I'm a big believer that there's lots of opportunities. We'll talk very briefly about the structure of current supply chains. So I think the intersection of the volatile trade, tariff, geopolitical world combined with the way supply chains are currently configured is how we identify the opportunities. And then we'll talk a little bit about the organizational capabilities that are necessary to win in that world. Devin did this part. That's me. I've been a faculty member here at Darden for several years. And as Devin mentioned, I'm involved as the academic director for our Institute for Lifelong Learning. I think learning is going to play a key part in organizations winning. I've been studying supply chains for a very long time, and COVID, Ukraine conflict, geopolitical things, tariff things have all of a sudden made it a household word. So, I played the long game and started studying this long ago before people cared a whole lot about it. But feel free to reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn. We're happy to connect in advance of my visit there in the fall. If I know it's probably afternoon, evening for some of you. So if you're multitasking, I get it. If you're listening while you're commuting, I get it. Here's the high level summary. So this is what I'm going to try to say over the next 15 or 20 minutes. Trade policy is chaotic, complicated. It's not going to get less so. Opportunities exist if you know where to look and you're willing to place some early bets. Supply chains, even after the series of disruptions that we've worked through, are still optimized for normal times. They're still running safety stock models and network optimization models in a similar way, which makes supply chains insufficiently aligned, somewhat fragile, and insufficiently segmented. So no surprise, that's going to tee up, well, what are the organizational capabilities for success? I need to be able to think about how to align my supply chain and how to segment and understand that my company is involved in multiple supply chains. And there are certain products where we need to approach things a certain way with certain strategies and other products where we don't. And so you see lots of organizations fail to recognize that and fail to be sufficiently differentiated based on that segmenting. And a preview of the organizational capabilities are going to be prioritize an end-to-end view. The thing at the top of the list in the consulting work and research work that I do is insufficient alignment within organizations and with their partners in the supply chain. I'm not going to go too deep on AI given the time, but there's lots of opportunities, I think, to use AI. I actually think most of the opportunities for AI are automating and improving the standard kinds of decisions so that you can elevate your talent to solve the big messy problems that are required for success. Here's trade policy overview. Trade policy, a trend that's been going on before the current tariff posturing has been trade policies have been growing in number and complexity. I have a couple of slides on that. Normally, companies or policymakers have thought about tariff policies at the country level or at the sector level. I'm thinking about apparel or automotive or semiconductor. And that's the wrong view. I'm going to give some examples here, some emerging work that I've been doing on if you need to think through the supply chain at the product category level. One of the things that one of my mantras when I'm working with companies on supply chains is attention to the right level of detail. You cannot live in the clouds. You will miss very important things. You cannot get mired in the weeds and say, I've got to figure out how many widgets to put on this truck. So it's finding the right level of detail. That right level of detail is at the supply chain segmented by the product category or line of business level. Examples coming. And if you can look there and see the end-to-end supply chain and are willing to place some early bets, there's some opportunities. This has been a movement in force for decades. So this isn't just the current US administration pushing tariffs and then response tariffs from other parts of the world. There have been preferential free trade agreements long ago. What's changed is that there are more and more in place between subsets of countries, bilateral or multilateral countries, and they are including more and more of what we call rule of origin. So these have grown coincident with supply chains being global and complex. The trade policy has been even more and more complex. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about rules of origin and what that means through a couple of examples quickly with the focal market being US, but I'll touch on other policies. USMCA was US-Mexico-Canada agreement looked at automotive, and the rule of origin in place there was what's called regional value content. You have to make the stuff in one of those three countries a sufficient amount of the product in order to qualify for reduced tariffs. I'll also briefly talk about the Central America Free Trade Agreement, which requires a provision called yarn forward. So these are among the first trade agreements that try to micromanage the supply chain. You need to make these parts, but you don't have to make these parts for US-Mexico-Canada agreement. You have to go upstream in the supply chain and do from yarn forward the fabric on, not just cut, make, and trim the garment. spoiler alert, they didn't work very well. This yarn forward provision said, the US in this case said, we would like for Central America to build more capability, do more value add steps in the supply chain. Reasonable idea on the surface. Unfortunately, what happened is companies didn't think, or policymakers didn't think at the product category level. So what happened is they expanded upstream in Central America, but all in low value cotton because it was much easier to take that input. And that pushed out man-made fibers. And so you see over here this economic projection said this is going to lift the apparel sector, the textile sector in Central America by 40%, was the economic projection that didn't think about the supply chain, didn't think about the inputs. And what actually happened is it dropped by about 9% because of a big product mix shift. You contrast that with a coincident agreement, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, that didn't include this yarn forward provision, and the opposite happened in the product mix. So a complete miss in the projections of the policy from policymakers by not thinking about the product segment. What that led to, this is foreseeable because you can look at the input costs at the time these policies were passed. And what it meant was companies that figured this out early started making man-made fiber products in Africa, cotton products in Central America, and ended up winning. So not foreseeing, not thinking about where the inputs are coming from at the product category level led to some misses. And that's one of the things that identified with the winning opportunities. It's also an example of policymakers trying to micromanage supply chains, which is happening more and more. That is a trend that's not going away. US, Mexico, Canada says, here's the list of parts. It's a hard thing to do. It doesn't adapt well. So some of you maybe are young enough, you don't even know what a cassette deck is, but cassette decks are on the list, haven't been around for a while. And the list isn't really adapting. The list of parts that sort of you get credit for under this agreement isn't really updated for lithium ion batteries or LCD screens or things that are becoming a bigger and bigger part of the car. But this is an example of, again, micromanaging the supply chain rather than requiring steps in the supply chain, having specific parts that we wanted to retain in the region. Policymakers are out there trying to say, like, what are the specific things that we would like to retain in our country or our region? And that's going to identify opportunities for people that know where to look. This was designed to reduce reliance on China for parts. It actually had the opposite effect. And that's, again, foreseeable because you're going to encourage manufacture of certain parts in a region. Companies will take advantage. That's going to take capacity that's pushed somewhere else. If you go look at the landed costs of input, very similar to the other agreement, you identify that, yeah, the engine parts, the upstream parts come into the supply chain. So if I had one thing to say about tariff policies, it's look at the rules of origin, look upstream in the supply chain, because all of these policies are going to have the effect of selective activity. So if we have a policy here, I'll go through these quickly. The US, as well as EU, Japan, South Korea, India, trying to encourage more local pharmaceutical activity. These are all relatively recent, except for South Korea. You see similar things in semiconductor. Everyone's now saying, we want more semiconductor activity. And so what's going to happen is companies in these sectors and supporting sectors need to look and say, well, what are the subsets at the product line level, and looking at the upstream components where there's going to be opportunity. Okay, trade policy is going to continue to be complicated. I don't know, people like to use the phrase level playing field, not level playing field. What I know is that the playing field is going to continue to have bumps and changes, and it's going to continue to move. And so being on top of it is going to be critical. Things to know about supply chains. I think about this a lot. We've still optimized for normal times. So we've actually figured out how to scramble when there are disruptions, but we haven't really learned how to build in resilience in a systematic way very well. The adoption of technology, starting from a couple of decades ago, 20, 30 years ago, enterprise software, standard inventory models, network optimization models have led to lower inventories and choke points in fragile supply chains. We're still not great at this resilience thing. Three main challenges of that: our visibility to sub-tier suppliers of suppliers is limited. Our memories are short. We forget the lessons that we learned from disruptions. We get through them and go, oh, good, back to normal. And these processes tend to be manual and ad hoc. And most supply chains are insufficiently aligned and insufficiently segmented. If I look historically, there was a period, internet boom, adoption of software, where we see significant reduction in inventory. So we've reduced inventories as an industry, as global business, even while we're global sourcing more, so lead times are longer, and even while variety is increasing. Every supply chain has a choke point. Pharmaceutical, 2/3 of the active ingredients, again, similar to our analysis of Central America free trade and US-Mexico-Canada agreement. We'll think upstream, think product category level, but think where's the stuff coming from? Active ingredients, 2/3 from India and China. China has an enormous presence in critical minerals for clean energy, electric vehicle, semiconductors. You see all of the red here. So again, I look upstream and I see where the choke points are. Food, grain, the four main grains are produced in a small number of places, and they all go through a few maritime choke points. So we still have these leaned out, low inventory, efficient, just in time supply chains going through a series of choke points. So we haven't really done that great thinking about resilience. Evidence that we're not great at thinking about resilience. I'll briefly read these. It says, here are these quotes. This is yet another wake-up call for companies that have yet to strengthen resilience. We're going to learn our lesson. Fighting this virus is very important because the global supply chain can't be broken. I could ask you who said these, but the real issue isn't who, but when. These were actually the Tohoku earthquake and SARS. And so we see these quotes, we see these, we're going to learn our lesson and build in ability to handle disruptions, and it hasn't really happened. Okay. Where does that leave us for capabilities required for success? And in 5 minutes or less, I think there's a few key organizational capabilities, things that I see consistently in my research and my consulting. First and foremost, I know I've been talking about supply chains. I think the most important thing is commitment to operational excellence. Whatever product or service you do, you probably have a system for delivering it at a high quality way, keeping your employees and workers and partners safe. And that's easy to lose and hard to recover. Organize for alignment. Top performing organizations have boundary spanning performance indicators and organizational structures and role structures with an end-to-end view. You need to, top performing organizations elevate their talent. They automate the easy things. The world requires your people in your organization to solve messy problems, messy end-to-end problems, track down supply chain visibility information, understand complicated trade policy to find the opportunities. That means you have to have them have an end-to-end view, and you have to take the things that are easy to automate off their plate. That is where I would focus my AI strategy at the moment, which is what are the things that I can automate to liberate the time of my people. I do not think we're going to see massive employment displacement as a result of this in the near term. I think what you're going to see is winning organizations elevating their talent so they're doing a better job solving these messy problems rather than managing day-to-day demand and supply planning, following up customer service, that sort of thing. It's easy to lose. two high-profile companies over the last few years. Abbott with baby formula just not following standard operating procedure, just having lost focus on operational excellence. Same with Boeing. So I'm here preaching elevate your talent end to end. Top of the list has to be quality and safety, and it's easy to lose, and it's damaging to organizations once it's gone, hard to recover. Top performing organizations do a few things. This is a study by McKinsey reported on here, and what I'm highlighting over here on the right side of the slide is organizations that financially outperform their peers. They responded on what are the things we do. The biggest difference here is a centrally managed talent development, talent rotation program for their supply chain workers to get that end-to-end view, to keep them around and elevate their skill set. That is in conjunction with end-to-end performance metrics. Example of this is many companies are still organized by, I have my demand planning people over here, I have my supply planning people over here, I've got a profit and loss owner separately, and top performing organizations have largely realigned those kinds of roles. So there's an organizational design piece that can trigger better alignment. Use data selectively. So this is an example of a project I did where people in the organization were spending lots of time troubleshooting a problem and said, we're using the standard inventory stuff. It's not working. Why isn't it working? And so we used AI to figure out that the demand distributions didn't follow a normal distribution. And so you use a data-driven method called bootstrapping, easy to deploy these days. Generative AI can write the code. And then you get people out of troubleshooting this problem, and then they go to a higher level problem. In this case, that higher level problem was, wait, why do the distributions look like this? Our demand doesn't look like that. There's something funny going on. And there were some oddities in how they were sharing information with suppliers, and they were able to make even bigger improvements than just the AI implementation. Experimentation culture is important. You need to make bets. You need to try things. You need to have an organization that's agile. This is an example where office products company we worked with downsized their assortment. They thought we have too much variety. And so instead of talking about it for a long time, they said, let's change the assortment in a bunch of stores and learn something from it. So use a little reinforcement learning model to sort of understand how to pick the right variety and then learn from it and deploy it at scale. Last one. So we're insufficiently aligned. How do we do that? We reorganize roles, we upskill our talent, we use boundary spanning end-to-end performance indicators to get the commercial side of the business, the sales side of the business on the same page with operations. This is a study by Ford. One lesson I'd say here is don't assume a trade-off exists until you know that it does. So resilience or flexibility in supply chain is often put at odds with cost effectiveness. And one of the things that you find when you look end to end, look upstream and downstream, invest in visibility, is you can find things where, like, hey, you know what? By partnering with our suppliers on this, we can actually get more resilient because they have other facilities or backup inventory, or we can co-manage inventory, and it actually improves our flexibility and resilience and reduces cost. So the example here is just saying they segmented all of their supply and said, look, for low value things, maybe we just invest in a little bit more inventory. We lock in contracts, negotiate service level agreements. We see some higher risk things where we say, like, well, let's partner on design, let's dual source. These are the kinds of things I see companies not do enough, which is they'll often apply a sort of one size fits all and not do segmentation. This is just one example of different segmentations. These are the kinds of things that you want people in your organization solving, like thinking about how should we segment, what conversations should we have with suppliers or customers, and where can we find things that improve both profitability and resilience and flexibility. Time goes by fast, I know. It's a lot coming at you. I would say on trade policy, it's not going to get any less complicated. Policymakers, nation states are making targeted investments. We saw versions of CHIPS Act, pharmaceutical investment. There's tariffs, on again, off again, but I think we're in for a new reordering. We saw a reordering of global supply chains 30 years ago. China joined the World Trade Organization, and there was lots of outsourcing. And I think we're in 30 years later, I think we're in another phase. I think it's going to be much more targeted. So we saw just huge sections of manufacturing and services moved around the world. I think it's going to be much more targeted. So understanding trade policy, understanding the complicated supply chains we have is going to identify where you would see that there'll be product category specific things where the opportunities will be, and place some early bets. Supply chains are insufficiently aligned and segmented. Upskill your talent to help them be more aligned and segmented and agile and take advantage of these opportunities. I could talk about this stuff for hours, but I won't. We have time for a couple of questions, maybe.
Do we have any questions? We do have a question we had received from the participants earlier. If you had to give one piece of advice to CEOs right now navigating global volatility, what would it be?
That's a great question. I would say in the organizations that win are the ones that are going to be keeping track and looking for the opportunities. And so have an organizational view, have an organizational function where you're, it's effortful and I'm sure frustrating, but keeping track of the day-to-day changes in what countries are saying about tariffs, keeping on top of that. I think no matter what, I mean, I guess the best piece of advice is no matter what, investing in visibility in your supply chain is going to, and organizational agility is going to allow you to adapt to whatever comes up next.
There's one more question, and I'm going to read it out. Are there examples of companies that anticipated trade disruptions and used the volatility as an opportunity to improve their supply chains or grow market share?
Yeah, so from a historical perspective, probably the highest profile is Walmart. That when they saw opportunities in China before others and opened a significant presence, sourcing office in Shenzhen before China joined the World Trade Organization, and placed I will call it a substantial but acceptable loss level bet that put them ahead of other global retailers. And so the anticipation of the outsourcing wave and the China joining the World Trade Organization allowed Walmart to become the world's largest retailer.
We're out of time, but we have one more question, Professor, if that's fine.
Of course.
Okay. All right. Some of the challenges that have always vexed end-to-end metrics are the clumsy and inaccurate data tracking. How much time should be spent on fixing the plumbing of data rather than adopt AI on inaccurate data?
That's a great question. And a lot. In fact, it's one of the things that you see in the work that I've done. I've seen much more of the investment been, and it always takes longer than you think it should. But having a coherent data governance strategy, getting the data in place is an absolute priority. I think end-to-end view and getting the right data is actually the hard part. I think sort of the logic of AI, like some of the findings, some of the ideas, when you have the right data and you have the right frame, are very easy. The trade policy work that I'm doing earlier says, look, if you just looked at the choices for man-made fiber and cotton, the answer becomes obvious, but people missed it because they didn't have the data of all of the transactions. So I don't know if I can give a numerical answer, but whoever asked the question is completely right and dialed in that you need to get the data governance in place before applying AI.
Right. That's all we have time for today. Professor Doug Thomas, thank you so much for spending this time with us and for taking us through tariffs and trade wars in a record amount of time. And we look forward to meeting you again in September.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thank you.